Good morning and welcome to the Comix Experience Kids Club meeting for February. I love that word, February.
You actually pronounce the R, the first R.
I do because it's silly.
Because it's there.
It's silly and it's there. Our book this month is MECH CADET YU Volume 1 here, and we have the wonderful Greg Pak, the author, here live in person. Did you guys read MECH CADET YU and did you like it?
Yeah.
Can you be louder? Can you go?
Yeah.
There we go. All right. Very good. Glad to hear it. So hi, Greg.
Hi.
Normally, the first question I ask is why comics? But I want to get back to that with you.
All right.
What I want to do is I want to start off because I looked you up on Wikipedia as one does before they conduct the interview.
There you go.
And I saw that you studied political science at Yale.
Yes.
Then you were a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford before you started doing film and comics. So this fascinates me, and I would love to hear about the route that took you to comics.
Well, you know, it's funny because I actually started off as a kid. How old are you guys? Like, what's the age range here? You guys are 10, 11. So when I was your age, Ray Bradbury was my hero. You guys ever read Ray Bradbury stories? There's one hand back there. I love books. I love reading. I love science fiction. Ray Bradbury was this writer who wrote all these incredible short stories. And one year for my birthday, I got this giant book of Ray Bradbury short stories. And they were all so weird and creepy and wonderful. I wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer from the time I was about 9 years old. Before that, I had always drawn. My mom was the kind of mom who bought us crayons and paper instead of coloring books. She didn't like coloring books. So I was always drawing as a kid. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a writer. And I wrote constantly as a kid. I wrote tons of short stories. I was always drawing and doodling, and I drew cartoons, and I eventually, years later I went to college, and I studied political science in college. Somewhere along the line, I don't know why, I stopped thinking of being a writer as an actual job I could do, even though I was still writing all the time. I was always very... I guess I was just aware of conflict. You know, I was aware of the way different groups come into conflict, and I felt like I wanted to try to do something about that with my life in some way or another. I think that's partly because I grew up. I'm half Korean and half white, and I grew up and was very aware of race from a very young age. I had a great childhood, but I also encountered racism and was very aware of that from a young age. And so I always, was concerned by that for personal reasons, and also because the world shouldn't be like that. I was also a Boy Scout, and so I had all these notions of like, I had learned ideals about equality and the way people should be treated in this country that I felt like were not always in practice. And so when I got older, I was really interested in political science. So I studied political science in college, and I went to Oxford to study history with the idea that I'd become a better politician if I went into politics. But at the same time I was doing all of that, I was always writing and drawing. I was drawing cartoons throughout college and beyond. And at a certain point, I kind of realized that that's actually what I needed to be doing. I worked in politics. I worked for Ann Richards when she was running for governor in Texas way back in 1990. That was fantastic. It was a great experience. I worked in her Office of Education Policy afterwards, and felt like I was doing important stuff, but I also realized I wasn't really happy. I realized I kind of needed to be telling stories again. Even though, I've been doing it throughout, but ultimately, I went to NYU for film school, and I studied film, and I I made a bunch of short films, and all through this time, I was also writing comics. I've been reading comics and drawing. but eventually I came out of film school. I made a movie called Robot Stories, which actually played here in San Francisco years ago, long before any of you were born, because I'm that old. But then I got a chance to talk to folks at Marvel. I had an agent who said, "Hey, Marvel's looking to talk to new people about writing comics. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yes." For whatever reason, I'd never thought about pursuing writing comics as a job. I don't know why. I read comics constantly. I loved them, but in my head, I had separated the business of comics from anything that I would possibly be doing. I literally don't know why. It's ridiculous, but then I mean, since I'd kind of done something in the indie film world that got me a little bit of notoriety, and I got a chance to take a shot at writing comics, and it worked out, and I've been doing it ever since. So that's how it all came about.
Yeah. So, how did you apply at Marvel Comics? Did you send them script samples? Did you send them the film?
I had an agent, and my agent sent them the. I think she sent the screenplay to my movie Robot Stories. Mm-hmm. And then also the editors, I think it was kind of a nice thing because the editors I eventually worked with on my first book came to see the movie when it screened in New York. And so that's a nice way to, have a good impression on editors when they can see your work in a theater like that. So, Robot Stories was a terrible writing sample for getting more screenwriting work because it was an anthology picture. And an anthology means that it's like a bunch of different stories. So it was 4 different stories in one movie, which is a ton of fun, but very few movies are made like that. On the other hand, it turned out that it was a great writing sample for comics because it was 4 stories, each one of which was about 20 minutes, which is kind of roughly analogous to the length of a comic book script. And they all dealt with the story is Robot Story, so it was about families and couples struggling with the kind of things that families and couples struggle with, but in every story there was a kind of robot twist. Like one story was about a couple that want to adopt a baby, but before they can adopt a human baby, they live in a world where you have to take care of a robot baby first, so they've got this little egg-shaped robot baby. Do you guys do that experiment in school where you have to carry around an egg? Have you ever had that?
Not yet.
They might,
We
yeah.
did that in middle school.
Oh yeah, that is a middle school thing, right? So you guys are like 5th, 6th grade, right? Is that like you're around there? Yeah. 4th? Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, so eventually you may have this thing where you have to carry an egg around. It's supposed to teach you about like taking care of something small, and fragile, like a baby. But that's an example of one of the stories in Robot Stories. And I think the folks at Marvel looked at that and said, oh, well, this is kind of what we do. We do, crazy sci-fi stories, but with a real human story at the core of it. That's what makes us care, is that there's a real emotional story there, as well as the big fun robots and everything else.
Cool. That's neat. So I want to go back to this just for one last second. I'm entirely entertained that you have all this education and you kind of aren't using any of it directly. Now, do you think how much of that do you end up applying to your work? Well,
the funny thing is that everything you ever read, everything you ever study, no matter what it is, is valuable to you if you're going to be a writer. If you're going to write stories, even if let's say you were to write a story where the Hulk gets shot into space and he ends up on an alien planet. Like people on Earth think he's too dangerous. They shoot him into space. He ends up on an alien planet, and it's a gladiator story where he becomes a gladiator and then fights for his planet. You could kind of think you could just make that all up, right? This was actually a story that I wrote. It's called Planet Hulk. How many of you guys saw Thor Ragnarok? Did you guys? Any of you guys? Okay, there's some hands. So all of that stuff with the gladiator Hulk in there came from this book I did called Planet Hulk. So there's a big fat graphic novel. Actually, it's on the table here. Called Planet Hulk. Anyway, so I wrote this thing, and it's just this. It's this big crazy gladiator story in space, right? You could kind of think you could just make that all up, but in order to write that, I found out that, as I was working on it, everything I ever read about history and politics and religion and animal life all came in handy because I was making up a whole new world. You know what I mean? So every nature documentary I ever saw, every time I went to a museum and looked at old weapons or old painting, every book I ever read about religion, all of that was really important to me while I was writing that book. So, you know, how many of you guys want to be writers? How many of you guys are interested in being writers? There's some hands there. All right. Well, my number one advice, if you're thinking about being a writer, is to read. Just read all the time. Have fun reading. Because the more you read, the more, well, first off, the more you'll understand how language works and how stories work, and you just start to absorb that. But also, I mean, when you read all kinds of stuff, you just have lots of interesting things bouncing around in your head, and you start to see other connections, and it helps make everything you do get more depth, have more depth, and more resonance.
Yeah. What was it like for you going to see that Thor movie and to see this thing that you wrote came out of your head up on the screen like that?
Well, it was pretty wild. I mean, has anybody actually read the Planet Hulk book? Any of you guys? Yeah, it's like there's a hand over there. There's another graybeard there who's read it. So the Planet Hulk book is actually kind of more serious. The movie's kind of a comedy, right? It's a big adventure comedy, and the Planet Hulk graphic novel, it's a little more hardcore. It's a little more serious, and it's a more tragic, frankly. But I love the movie. You know, like they took the core of these characters and had fun with them, but I felt like the emotional core was still there. You know, like there's a character. Yeah.
Did you did someone tell you that the whole gladiator thing was part of Thor Ragnarok, or did you just assume that from the trailers?
Oh, well, I kind of just found out about it the way you guys did. You know what I mean? Because I work in the comic side of it, and then there are other folks who work in the film and TV side of it, you know? And so they're very secretive because they don't want word to get out about everything. So sometimes I find out about these things at the same time as everybody else does. And it's like, oh my gosh. You know, like I think at the San Diego Comic-Con they showed off the Hulk's armor, you know, from the thing, and you know, like they had a booth and they were showing off armor that the Hulk wore, and it was like, that's like the armor in Planet Hulk, and that was the first time I'd heard of it. So and then later on I talked to folks and they kind of filled me in a little bit more on what was going on, but yeah, it was a big surprise. I mean, it's a very exciting and fun surprise. Yeah. But yeah, so there's a character called Korg, if you guys remember. There's that big stone man character, and in the you know, and he's basically kind of comic relief in the movie, but he still is got this kind of heart of gold. He's a big stone man with a heart of gold, and that's the way he is in the book. I mean, he doesn't crack jokes in the book the same way. He does have this kind of wry sense of humor, but they kept his spirit. And so I really appreciated that. Also, I've got a big goofy sense of humor, so I just enjoyed the movie a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun.
You said you used to read comics. What comics did you read when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, my favorite comic was Micronauts.
Micronauts?
Yes, right. Micronauts, because there were these toys called Micronauts. There were these, they actually were brought over from Japan. They actually were the toys. Eventually, that toy line became Transformers, but first they were Micronauts, and they were it was the interchangeable world of the Micronauts, and it was these kind of space toys that you could take apart and put together in all kinds of different ways. I was a big Lego kid. I had all these Lego bricks and everything. This was back when you would there weren't necessarily as many kits. It was just you just get a big giant box of bricks, and you would just make stuff out of them. It's kind of like Minecraft. It was like real world Minecraft. Yeah, here I am. I'm telling you, Lego's real world Minecraft as opposed to Minecraft being virtual Legos. But yeah, I mean, you just had all these blocks. You could build all kinds of stuff. So I love that whole building thing. So Micronauts were like that. You could take all these toys apart and put them together in all kinds of different ways. And I just thought robots were cool. You know what I mean? And then there was this comic series called Micronauts that was based on the toys, written by Bill Mantlo and drawn by Michael Golden. And it was like the greatest art I'd ever seen in my life. Michael Golden, I remember having a serious conversation with one of my teachers when I was maybe 12 years old, kind of comparing Michael Golden to Michelangelo, very seriously, which is totally valid. But but I love that book. I also love, there was a book called Moon Knight, which did really, it was Bill Sienkiewicz was the artist, and he was kind of experimenting in ways that I'd never seen in a comic book before. It was really wild, almost abstract stuff, and I thought it was incredible. There was this one really kind of powerful book, Moon Knight 26, I remember, that was actually about child abuse, and a lot of the book was done with like kind of children's drawings, you know. So it was really kind of creepy and powerful. It was amazing stuff. But actually before that, my first love in comics was Peanuts, Charlie Brown, and there's some big Peanuts volumes over there, I think. So if you haven't read Peanuts, I highly recommend it. We had those some reprint books of early Peanut strips with Charlie Brown and Snoopy. When Snoopy looked like an actual dog, he would walk around on 4 legs, and he looked much more dog-like. He didn't have the big bulbous nose. He had more of a actual beagle-shaped face and everything. But I just thought they were really funny and irreverent and awesome. Yeah.
Weren't the Peanuts weren't they called first oh boy, Charlie Brown or something?
Well,
they're called Charlie Brown.
Little Week.
It was Lil Folks, I think.
Folks.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think Charles Schultz really hated the name Peanuts. I think he wanted to call it something else. I can't remember what his preferred title was, but the syndicate was like, we'll call it Peanuts, and he was like, okay. But I think that's one of the things where he was like, I don't know why we did that. But certainly it didn't hurt the strip. But yeah, I love those. I also loved Usagi Yojimbo. You guys ever read Usagi Yojimbo? That's another. Those are comics done by Stan Sakai, and it's basically a samurai rabbit, and it's awesome. I just thought it was gorgeous, and that was when I was drawing all the time, and I would study the way Stan Sakai drew clouds, and then I'd try to draw them like that. You know, so I was really into it.
Neat. That's very cool. Yeah, it's interesting that you picked Michael Golden Micronauts, so detailed and specific, and then Sienkiewicz, who's abstract, both ends of comics expression. Yeah.
It's interesting. That's right, and the other kind of big comics figure that's in my pantheon is Linda Barry, who is this indie comics person who had a weekly strip that appeared called Ernie Pook's Comics, but it used to appear in these free weekly newspapers, which the Guardian shut down, didn't it? Or yeah. So I think it used to appear in the San Francisco Guardian and a bunch of others. But she had this whole thing with a girl named Marlis and her sister, and just they're growing up in the suburbs and all their weird experiences and stuff. And it was kind of crude. I mean, sort of deceptively crudely drawn. I mean, it had a very handmade feel, but it was really sophisticated at the same time. But it was just really, I really felt it. It was really visceral, you know. And it was very, very, very funny. It's kind of almost like Peanuts, almost for grown-ups. You know what I mean? It's a little dirtier, not in the sense of like dirty jokes, but just a little grubbier. You know what I mean? A little more raw. But I love all that stuff. I mean, and I did love a really wide range of art. Mm-hmm. You know.
And it sounds like you continued reading comics past your childhood.
Yeah. I mean, I went through phases. I never had the chance to read a whole bunch of superhero comics in a row, because when I was very young, I didn't have a cool comic book shop like this nearby that I could go to. I was getting on my Schwinn Stingray and riding down to the 7-Eleven. This was back when they used to have comics in 7-Elevens, and I'd ride down to the 7-Eleven and just see what they would have, and it was very hard to get consecutive issues, you know. And this was also before collected editions like the ones you guys are holding right now were very commonplace. It was hard to get those. So I had all these kind of random one-off issues, and I had lots of issues that I read and reread a million times, but I had no idea what happened before, what happened later. Right. You know what I mean? But I still love them. You know, I remember searching for months for Micronauts number 4. Because I had the others, but I didn't know what happened in issue number 4.
I always thought that was one of the thrilling things about comics.
Yeah, it was.
When we were kids on the newsstand, it was what got me into comics. Was there's these mysteries that I don't know and I want to know about. Yeah. These pantheons of characters and how does this story work?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, like that kind of. I mean, that's also the collection kind of part of it. Was that it was fun to like finish the collection. But yeah, I mean, that whole thing of reading something and having more questions was. I mean, I think that's a great experience just in general. Like things that make you ask questions tend to be great things to read. And comics were definitely like that for me. But there were certain phases when I didn't read. I always read comics, but I didn't read the same kind of comics my whole life. Like there were times when I was reading lots of, like I was reading Usagi Yojimbo, and I was reading like Linda Berry collections, and I was reading a lot of independent comics, but I wasn't reading many mainstream comics. And then in college, actually, I got back into like Batman because of Batman Year One and Dark Knight Returns, and then I got really into Japanese comics, a bunch of manga. Like Lone Wolf and Cub, and it just blew my mind. You know, so there were different times when I was reading different stuff. But yeah, I was a kid who drew, so I was always fascinated by comics.
Cool. So when you started writing your scripts at Marvel, your previous experience was film.
Yes.
Was it an easy adjustment, a hard adjustment to because the writing is different.
Yeah.
The pacing is different. The way you think about it is different. What was that adjustment like?
Well, it was both hard and easy, like a lot of things. Because it was kind of easy in the sense that when you learn how to write for film, you're learning how to write in a way they call dramatically. And when I say dramatically, I don't just mean like everybody's yelling and being really dramatic. I mean like you're showing action. You're showing people doing things. Like when you read a book, like a prose book, sometimes you can spend a lot of time just reading about like what people are thinking, right? It's like inner thoughts and all of that. But when you're watching a movie or reading a comic book, it's storytelling through pictures, right? And which means it's storytelling through action usually. People are doing things. So they're expressing, you know, like if you're reading, you could just in prose say, you know, he got really, really mad. You know, he was so mad. And that could work. But in comics, or in a movie, you want to show that, you know what I mean? So it's like he kicks over a chair, or he grits his teeth and stares at the floor, and his ears turn red. I mean, you can do that in prose too, but you kind of have to do that in movies or comics. That's called dramatic storytelling. You're telling story through action. So I'd learned a lot about that in film school, and so that kind of thinking really worked well in comics. But then comics has its own structure that's different from movies, you know? Like in a movie, you want to have something happen in the first scene, in the first minute to kind of pull you in. And then you definitely, like, there's another really big, I mean, there's several points during the course of that first chunk of a movie where you want to hook people, you want to keep them watching. And that's based on time, you know? Like, because people always have the option of like walking out of the movie or turning the channel or shutting down the computer or whatever. So you want to keep them involved over time. In comics, it's the same principle, but it's really about physical space. You want to keep people turning the page, you know. So at the end of a page of comics, in fact, you know, like you guys have this, but like, let's see, even like on the very first page of MECH CADET YU, you know, like you see this, you know, the general's giving this speech and he's talking about Skip Tanaka, this guy who was this great hero with the robots. And at the end he says, Skip and his RoboMech partner saved lives, won hearts, and inspired generations by defending this nation from crisis after crisis, ... You know, so there's a little thing at the end of the page, and you wonder, oh, that ... what happens next? You turn the page. You know, so comics, you know, learning how to write comics some of it was about that kind of structural stuff, kind of thinking about ways to keep people turning pages, you know? Yeah.
Okay, so I really like the book, but the first time I tried to read this book, I read the first page, and I'm like, I didn't really like it. I shut the book, and then when I had time, I actually opened it. Actually, the second page is where I got hooked.
Oh, there you go.
Because
Well,
the first page I thought was kind of boring.
there you go. Yeah. So you know, so thank you for that. Thank you for the feedback. I'm glad you came back and read the second page. What was it that hooked you about the second page?
I don't know. It's just like I don't really know.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really interesting comment too, because it's like one of the challenges in telling a story is, particularly when you're kind of creating a new world, is you've got a certain amount of information about the world that you need people to understand, but you don't want to bore them, right? And so I bored you a little bit on this first page, but then you turn the page and then you met I'm guessing you met the kid, right? So like, because the general's talking about like, oh, and these robots come down and they bond with kids, and you know, and someday one of those cadets might be you, and then you see this kid down here, and it's like, oh, you know, now you're hooked. So so I'm glad you kept reading and got to the second page. But that's you know, that's the challenge. So but yeah, so those are some of the things you think about when you're doing comics.
Sure. Did you start like at that point studying comics?
Yeah, well, yeah.
For those kind of
yes,
tricks
yeah.
and techniques and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in film school, I remember once when I was learning how to write screenplays, I sat down and I rewatched a bunch of my favorite movies of all time, and I just took notes while I was watching, and I wrote down what happened in every scene, you know, and kind of looked at, and then I studied like, okay, how did this thing build scene by scene? And I did that for like Casablanca and Jaws and Blade Runner and Seven Samurai and a bunch of other kind of movies I just loved. Unforgiven, I think. And I didn't do that exact kind of thing when I started working in comics, but I read a lot of comics, and I kind of started to really think about why I love them. Like, what is it that pulled me into it? What were the things that the writer and the artist were doing that made me keep reading, that made me care? One of the big things that I kind of discovered like that, and this was after I'd been writing comics for maybe six or 7 years. I kind of, every once in a while, I like to kind of go back and rethink about everything I'm doing and see if I can do things better. I mean, I'm constantly trying to do things better. I'm constantly learning. But when I started writing Superman comics for DC, I went back and I reread a bunch of the comics that I love the most. And I realized a lot of them had voiceover. They had little captions throughout that had like the character's thoughts, the character's voice, you know. And I kind of had this film student's resistance to that, you know, in most of my comics. I hadn't used that because I thought like that's cheating, you know, that I just wanted to show the action, you know, in real time in the panels and not have this other commentary. But then I realized all these comics I love use that, you know. So what does that say? Why is that? And I realized, you know what? Comics they're not just movies in print. You know what I mean? They are also books.
Sure.
So comics also use prose. You know what I mean? And so using spoken word like that selectively and a little more was a way to take advantage of what comics can do that's different from movies, and different, you know, like comics are different from prose books. They're different from movies. They're their own thing. Let's figure out all the different things comics can do and play with all of that. Yeah. So I let myself do more of that, and it was really fun and educational. You can have like a voice of a character, like an inner voice of a character, kind of commenting on what's going on, but giving you a different perspective. You know what I mean? Like if you've got, like if you're doing, I've never done this exactly this, but off the top of my head, like let's say you have a superhero book and your superheroine is fighting a monster, you know, but, and so you're seeing all this big crazy superhero action as she fights a monster, but inside her head she's thinking about her cat, you know what I mean? And like thinking about the way this monster looks like her cat. Like that gives you a whole nother story, right? You know, like it's a really interesting way to tell to sort of make your story more interesting, you know, and then maybe in the end she's like, oh, maybe this monster is like my cat, and that's how she ends up, you know. And then she scratches under the chin and it calms down. But you know, like they're I'm always trying to find out more and better and more fun and more evocative ways to tell the stories.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did MECH CADET YU come from?
So it came from loving robots as a kid. I loved, I grew up when Star Wars was first coming out, and when I was playing with these Micronauts, and I was reading Ray Bradbury's stories. Ray Bradbury has this great story called "I Sing the Body Electric" about a kid who gets an electric grandmother, a robot grandmother, and so all this stuff just really was kind of in my head. I also there used to be a show called The Wonderful World of Disney, which was a Walt Disney show, and I remember they had all these episodes. It seemed like they had a million of them about kids who go off in the woods and befriend a wild animal, like a bear or a deer or something, and then and it's this incredible thing. And then at the end, the hunters come or whatever, and the kids throwing rocks at the deer and crying and saying, "Go back to nature." But I love those stories. There was something really powerful about the idea of a kid like me becoming friends with something huge and powerful. I don't know. I mean, I think that's because kids, when you're a kid, there are a lot of people who are bigger than you, and the idea of having a big friend who could be your buddy and help defend you is really compelling. So, that kind of stuck with me for many years. And then after I made robot stories, I just had robots in my mind, and eventually came up with the idea of a kid and his giant robot story. I mean, there's been a bunch of different kid and giant robot stories over the years, but I figured this would be a fun take. It's a janitor's kid who works at this military academy where all these military kids have their own giant robots, and this kid dreams of having that experience. Will never have that experience because he's just a janitor's kid, but then one day he bonds with a giant robot, and then they let him become a MECH cadet. So, that was a fun underdog story. I always like underdog stories too, about people who everybody else is looking down on for one reason or another. And that kid has a chance to step up.
Yeah. Do any of you guys have any particular questions about MECH Cadet? I knew you did because your hand's been up a lot.
It's not a question, but I noticed that on the back it says every year Giants sending in robots from outer space, blah blah blah. And then I look in the book, and on the second page, the general says, because every 4 years.
You are correct.
Another goof.
It's a goof. We goofed it up.
Should be an editor.
I know. You caught a goof up. That's right. That happens. It is every 4 years. But so trust the book. Trust the inside of the book rather than the cover.
And also, is this an energy drink or something?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, in the back there.
So I just have a question about Hero Force 1.
Yeah.
So it said in the comic that Hero Force 1 was, okay, let me just find the page actually, because I don't have all the details memorized. Okay, here it is. It says the first 100% man-made and human-controlled robo-mech on the planet.
Yeah.
But then later in the story, Hero Force started attacking you, and Park was like, stop, but it didn't stop. And I know they put something in the behavior box, but that should still make it 100% human controlled, shouldn't it?
Well, who's controlling that behavior box? That's the
Oh.
question.
Oh, okay.
Ooh, yeah.
People, and they're like, we gotta take you out.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Right. All right. There you go. Although there's some surprising things that happen with Hero Force as it keeps going, though. So another thing about that is that the general says it's 100% human controlled, but is the general right? You know what I mean? Sometimes characters are going to say things, but they may actually, maybe they're lying, or maybe they don't know the whole thing. So things can develop over time. But yeah, people talk about unreliable narrators in books.
Also, because it's metal to be like the other mechs, right? So
Yeah. So.
that sort of makes sense that they might have accidentally done something wrong and added a bit of like self-control for it, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So is Hero Force 1 going to end up having its own personality and sentience? That's
because you took the map thingy out of the behavior box, right?
exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
keep on reading.
I've read the whole book like 10 times and I love it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Nice.
That's awesome.
It's being serialized regularly as a regular comic before it gets put in the books. And so in other words, part of that is to tell you we have the next 2 chapters.
Yeah, so this has issues 1 through 4 in it, and then there's issues 5 and 6 that have come out. I just turned in issue number 8 to the artist who's drawing it right now, and I just have been outlining issue 9. So there's more story coming. Keep on reading.
So how far do you see it going?
Well, I've got a big 12-issue story, so there's this kind of epic 12-issue story, which I'm so excited about. It's got a big ending, and so we're definitely doing that, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Okay.
The exciting thing is that originally it was just going to be 4 issues, but folks like you guys got all excited about it and bought a lot of it, and the publishing company said, we're going to keep going. So thank you.
Yeah, no, the response was really strong. Yeah.
So you said you want to have a 12-issue story. How long do you think that will take you?
Well, they come out every month, so yeah, so it's about about a year altogether, We do have a couple of skip months put in there, so maybe like 14 months altogether. So yeah, that's one of the things about monthly comics is that they have to come out, like in order to make the schedule. They like if so that's one of the reasons little mistakes come up every once in a while, because it's like it's just got to go to the press, and so you have time to read it and reread it, but you really need to read it. Maybe you needed to read it one more time to catch everything. So we make a little goof ups every once in a while, but hopefully we solve enough of them so that the story works for you.
Yeah.
Anybody else in the audience have a question about the book?
Yeah.
How did you come up with the robot's name?
Oh, she said, how did I come up with the robots' names? I just kind of thought about it a while, names are really hard sometimes, like I actually have, I talk with my writer friends about that, and coming up with a good name also for the book, the whole story is really hard. But character names are also pretty tricky sometimes. With the robots, I think Buddy was the first name that I came up with, and it was like, I've been writing the book for a while, or I've been writing these stories for, I think I'd written the first issue, and I think we named him for the first time in the second issue. And at that point, I think Stanford had he just called him Buddy, just like, come on, Buddy, and I realized that's a good name. That's, that felt like the right name for him. And then some of the other names, I think, Sanchez's robot it's big and red, and but it wasn't until the colorist had sent in the art. Triona is the colorist, Triona Farrell, and she had colored that robot red, and then I was tweaking the dialogue and realized that I needed to name that robot, and I looked at it and was like, oh, that's Big Red, so that was the name for that robot. Lots of times it's kind of, Comix is collaborative. You've got a really cool team of people who are helping you put it all together. So looking at what your collaborators have done and your artists have done, that can help inspire stuff too.
Yeah, how often do you change something that you've written from the script to the final process?
Oh, all the time. That's one of the great things about comics is like you have several different chances along the line to make things better, So I always tweak the script after I get in the art from the artist, before it goes to the letterer, because there's like all the words in the comic. These are called balloons, all the word balloons and the captions. The captions are the square boxes that have like off-panel dialogue and stuff. And then the white things with the arrows or the tails are called balloons. All those captions and balloons and everything are done by the letterer, who puts all those in there digitally. So the art comes in first. Well, first I do the script, and I work on that with the editor. That goes to the artist. The artist does the art. The colorist colors the art. And then I look at the script again and change the dialogue and everything to better match the art, Because sometimes like a character will have a really great expression, and I realize I don't need to have the character saying as much because the expression sells it, Other times I might need to explain a little bit more because it's a little confusing or whatever.
Sure.
And then, and sometimes actually every once in a while an artist will draw a character who's just awesome, who looks really great, and then I give that character lines, then eventually that character becomes more important during the course of the story. Yeah, way in the back.
It's not exactly a question. I just want to say that I think the art is really good, and I like how you designed the two mechs that came onto the landing pad in the scene where only Big Red and Thunder Wrecker came.
Oh,
I
yeah.
really like the design. But my favorite rover design would definitely have to be Buddy and Skip Takana's, because it looks like super cool. I like the design.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you
Not
so much.
just the color, but how you do it.
Yeah, so I don't know if everybody could hear that, but she said she just really liked the designs, particularly of Buddy and Skip's robot. You know,
Do you have a
Takeshi.
name for Skips, actually?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a name for Skips Takana's mech?
You know, we haven't. Oh, yeah, actually, we do name that later on. I'm not going to tell you yet, but we're going to reveal that in issue 8, I think. You'll find out what Skip's robot's name is.
Issue 8 then.
Yeah, I'm pretty. Yeah, it is issue 8. It is issue 8. Yes, yeah, I just did the dialogue tweaks on that one. Actually, it might be 7. Is it 7? No, it's 8. It's 8. It's issue 8. So Takeshi Miyazawa is the artist, and I'm going to give all you guys. You're all going to walk away with this book, and just related to what you were just talking about. One of the cool. Okay, so this book is a 10-page story called Los Robos, which Tak and I did like 3 or 4 years ago. And it's the initial story that inspired MECH CADET YU. So you're gonna, and then later on we did MECH CADET YU. But this is the first thing that inspired it. And so you're gonna walk away with this, and you'll be able to kind of look at this and see what's similar and what's different from the final story. And one of the things, I mean, just right here you can see the 2 different versions of Buddy, right? I don't know if you guys can see this that well, but can anybody talk about anybody notice any differences here off the top of your head here? Yeah, there's a hand right back there. The heads? Yeah, so what's different about the heads? Say it again? Right. Yeah. Hold it, say it again, what? Oh, yeah, so one looks like he's got a mask on and the other one doesn't. Right, yeah, so this guy has like a nose and a mouth, right? And this guy doesn't, like in the final version. So what Tak did is, you know, when we had a chance to make it into a bigger thing, he went back and redesigned all the robots. And it was, he just kind of felt like he wanted to do that. And it was really kind of cool because, he went from a more detailed face to a simpler face. Yeah.
Are you ever going to reveal where the RoboMechs come from?
Oh, are we ever going to reveal where the RoboMechs come from? Maybe. That's actually a really, really good question, because sometimes there's some mysteries that you definitely want to reveal, and sometimes maybe some mysteries should just stay mysterious, you know, and let people, you know, imagine for themselves. Yeah, and yeah, so I'm actually debating right now whether or not I'm going to reveal. You know, I have an idea in my head. I know where they, you know, I know in my head, but I don't know whether or not I want to put that out there. You know, maybe someday you can. Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes stories also, because this particular story it's almost like a fairy tale the way it starts, with this idea of like mysterious robots coming down and bonding with a kid. You know. There's a little bit of magic with that, and it's like, do I want to explain all that, or not? So I'm debating. What do you think? Do you think I should reveal, or do you think I should keep it a mystery?
I think like there should be a lie first, and then they should know the truth, and it should be really shocking.
Oh, you're thinking like a storyteller. That's really good. So she said she thinks there should be a lie first, and then they learn the truth, and it's really shocking. Well, you know, I might do that. I might have to steal your idea there.
There's another hand in the back.
Yeah, I had a question about what you think of this bookstore and other bookstores, how communities support them, and maybe what they could do more of. And Brian, how you think people could do more to support amazing authors like Greg, and just what you've seen. I mean, it's really incredible what you both have created. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, she asked what I think about bookstores like this and the communities they create. I love bookstores. I have spent untold hours in bookstores, just like, wandering around, staring at books, paging through books, thinking about stories, staring at covers, reading the back, reading the first few pages. Bookstores make me happy. Whenever I go to a new town, if I walk into a bookstore, I feel like I'm at home. Bookstores and libraries are my favorite places, just about. And they're really important to people. I was just reading a story about a friend, a person I know on Twitter was talking about being a kid who went to the library all the time, and then one day the librarian found out she was graduating and offered her a job. And then she was actually just graduating from middle school, so she was too young to take a job. But it was this huge thing for her that this was a place she belonged, and so, communities like this where all you guys can come here and hang out and talk to each other and talk to writers and creators and other folks who love these kinds of stories. That's a tremendous thing, So I'm always, I try to support local comic shops as much as I can. And whatever comic shops need to do to survive, I'm all about. You know what I mean? I think there's you've got a comic shop in the area who's running a Patreon right now, I think, and all, whatever it takes to keep these kinds of institutions alive, I'm all for it. Because there's something special about going to a physical location and having a chance to bump into other people who share the same interests, and also just see all the stuff. And human beings put all this stuff on walls and arranged it in certain ways so that you could find it. And some of this stuff is you're going to find stuff here that you would never find just messing around online. You'd never find it Googling or just going to Amazon, because human beings who love these books put them together in a very personal way. So I think that's a really, really special thing. When I was in film school, we had a bunch of video stores in New York that I would go to, and they were like museums to me. Just looking at all a video store. I mean, have any of you ever been inside a video store? Do you even know what a video? There you go. Okay, there's all right. There's two. Yeah. There used to be tons of stores like this, but they had. They rented movies, so there were video boxes everywhere, and it was like, you could look at the stuff and study the posters and just learn. It's weird how much you can learn just by looking at the covers and seeing all the stuff. Yes.
Actually, so you saying stuff about video stores reminds me of all of the Simpsons episodes when they go into video stores.
Right. Yeah, they go to comic book stores in
Yeah.
Simpsons too, right?
Yeah.
So.
And we still have video stores in San Francisco. So,
Oh, yeah.
we have a couple.
Yeah.
It's a herding breed. And so, for my part of that answer, what can you do? What you can do is you can support your local stores.
Yep.
You can go to them. You can buy things at them. You can spread your dollars around. I'm not saying you should spend every dollar that you're going to spend on comics here, though I'd like it when you do. But there are a lot of stores out there that deserve support, and if we don't support them, if we just take them for granted, then those stores go away eventually. And we don't want that, because this is what I live for. I've been doing this my entire life. I've been doing this since I got my first job in a comic shop when I was 16. And I basically have never not worked in a comic shop in all that time, which is really terrifying when you think about it. But it's what I do, and it's what I love, and it's a thing that I'm passionate about, And so the best thing that you can do besides supporting is you can spread the word as well. You can talk to your friends about a club like this, and tell other parents. You guys can tell your friends in school. There's this cool thing that we go to, and we're talking about art and creativity, and it's great stuff to know about and talk about. So yeah, that's what we can do.
Yeah, and the fact that stores like this doing stuff like this is amazing. You know what I mean? Like, I had a really great comic store that opened up when I was, I don't know, maybe in middle school. That was within bikeable distance, and it was tremendous. I met Michael Golden at that store. He came in for a signing, that artist I was talking about, and it was really kind of amazing to meet this person who'd drawn all this stuff that I love so much. And that would never have happened if that store didn't exist, So So yeah, you guys are lucky, and thank you to you for organizing all this.
Sure, I love comics. So that's easy. You guys have any more questions about MECH CADET YU?
Or anything, writing, drawing, any of that stuff?
Well, let me ask you a question about writing then.
Yeah.
Facing the blank page, or not really a blank page, it's more a white screen on your word processor probably. I assume you're not writing longhand.
I do both.
Okay.
I don't write out full scripts longhand, but I take notes. I carry around a little notebook, and I take notes all the time, and and then eventually I write out my outlines and do but then I print out. I'm old enough that I grew up, writing by hand, and so from time to time I feel like I work best when I print out stuff and then take notes on my notes on those printouts, and then I type it up, and then I print it out again and edit again and then type it up.
So particularly with the nature of monthly comics, where you have to write a script, you're not allowed to not write.
Yeah.
Are there any particular tricks or exercises that you do if you don't have an idea that second?
The great scary thing and also the really great thing about writing monthly comics is that you just have to do it. I mean, it's so easy when you're writing just to kind of think about it a long time and never actually do it. And the greatest thing is when you just start, just start getting ideas down. I mean, I think one of the things that's important to think about or to know when you're thinking about writing is that it's never perfect, and that's fine. In fact, it's terrible at the beginning, and that's fine. Just getting whatever ideas you have down on paper, that's the number one step. And don't worry about, is it perfect? Is this sentence the perfect formation of this sentence? Is even this scene I'm thinking about the best way to do this? Don't worry about whether it's perfect. Just get those ideas down, and then you can go back and fix it. Going back and fixing, I'm constantly going back and fixing, but I can't, if I haven't gotten something down, then there's nothing to fix. So just letting yourself be terrible to begin with, and just get that first draft down, just get those first few ideas down. That's one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself.
Yeah, don't be scared. Don't be scared to write,
It's also the kind of thing where that you don't have to know how everything works before you start. You know what I mean? Like if you're telling a story that has, a beginning, a middle, and an end, you might have a general idea for how the beginning works. You might have an idea for the end, but you might not know anything that happens in the middle yet. So write down your general idea for the beginning, write down your general idea for the end, and then maybe you have 2 or 3 random ideas. Just write those down in the middle somewhere, and then kind of look at that and see how that fits, and then move stuff around. And but if you just kind of get the stuff out there and start fiddling with it, then you can start to build something. Just mess around with it.
Good advice. Anybody else have any last questions before we turn this off? Really? All right. All right. You guys did like the book, though?
Yes.
And you want to read more? That's the way we like it.
Let me ask you guys a couple questions. Do we have a
please,
second?
no, go for it.
Because I got a crowd of kids here, and you guys are my favorite people because I wrote this book hoping that you guys would like it. So I'm just for my own interest, and also because I like to hear people who like my stuff. So which of the characters you guys like the most? How many people like Stanford the most? Few hands. How many people like Park the most? Oh, nobody likes Park. There's one for Park. How about Olivetti? How many are you guys Olivetti fans? There's a couple.
You have more than one.
With that? Yeah, yeah, totally. You can have more than one.
Yeah.
I have a lot of favorite characters.
Oh, you have a lot of favorite. Okay, cool. All right. Do you what is it like if you had to say one thing that you like the most about it? I'm curious. Is it the robots, the relationships, or what? What is the one thing? Yeah, back there. The mechs.
I like that. It's cool. And that they're like space mechs too.
Space mechs,
And
cool.
it's also cool that it said that they took the war off planet, which sounds super cool. It's still going on, but it's on a completely different planet.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's neat because you kind of like the hints about the bigger world and all of that. That's neat.
Also, mechs are cool.
Mechs are cool. I agree. Right there.
I like the idea that Stanford is like the only one with an actual relationship with his mechs.
Oh.
Because, well, Stanford like understands his mech more than the other ones. So
Right.
that makes me like want to root for Stanford more rather than like part for someone else.
That's cool. Yeah. He's. I think Stanford's all about the heart, right? He's got that. Yeah, right there.
I like the relationships between all the characters, like Stanford and his mom. They're always like arguing.
Yeah.
So.
Stanford's mom was. I think the story really came together for me when I realized Stanford's mom was going to be a really important character. You know, like that relationship kind of things really clicked for me when I figured out that the mom was going to be a big part of it.
Yeah, she's kind of my favorite.
Oh yeah. That's cool. Well, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna we're gonna sign some books, and if your parents will let you, there's actually Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah. Girl Scout cookies. Ooh. So yeah, thank you guys all for coming out. Greg, thank you for coming and speaking to us. The book was MECH CADET YU. Fantastic book. If you're watching at home and you haven't yet gone out and bought one, you should do that right away. This was the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. We'll see you next month. Oh, next month our book is My Summer Vacation with the Hawaiian Fire Goddess.
Wow.
We have the writer Kent Silveira. I don't have the date yet. I think it's going to be the third Sunday of March, which is, I believe, the 21st. But we haven't quite nailed it down yet. It'll be just a couple more days, and I'll have that information solidified. And I know the book after that, too, which is even cooler. But we'll let you know then. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.